Thank you very much, Professor Vard. It's a great honor for me to be here tonight. I've spent a lot of time in this room talking about Italian poets, and it's always been a great joy to be here. And I'm especially excited tonight because I want to hear what Giorgio Ficara has to say about this great poem. When I was working on my translation, I found myself feeling especially excited by and drawn to this incredible text. And now I feel like I'm going to learn what it's really all about from him. So I'll read my version, and then we'll hear what Giorgio has to say. Night Song of a Wandering Shepherd in Asia. What are you doing, moon, up in the sky? What are you doing, tell me, silent moon? You rise at night and go, observing the deserts, then you set. Aren't you tired of plying the eternal byways? Aren't you bored? Do you still want to look down on these valleys? The shepherd's life is like your life. He rises at first light, moves his flock across the fields, and sees sheeps, springs, and grass, then weary rests at evening and hopes for nothing more. Tell me, moon, what good is the shepherd's life to him or yours to you? Tell me, where is it tending, my brief wandering, your immortal journey? Little old white-haired man, weak, half-naked, barefoot, with an enormous burden on his back, up mountain and down valley, over sharp rocks, across deep sands and bracken, through wind and storm in burning. I'm sorry, this is not put, No, I'm sorry. I'm start again with the second. Little old white-haired man, weak, half-naked, barefoot, with an enormous burden on his back, up mountain and down valley, over sharp rocks, across deep sands and bracken, through wind and storm, in burning, freezing weather, runs on, running till he's out of breath, crosses rivers, wades through swamps, falls and climbs and rushes on, ever faster, no rest or relief, battered, bloody, till at last he comes to where his way and all his effort led him. Terrible, immense abyss, into which he falls, forgetting everything. This, O virgin moon, is human life. Man is born by labor, and birth itself means risking death. The first thing that he feels is pain and torment, and from the start, mother and father seek to comfort him for being born. As he grows, they nurture him, and constantly, by word and deed, seeks to instill courage, consoling him for being human. Parents can do no more loving thing for their children. But why bring to light, why educate? Someone will console for living later. If life is misery, why do we endure it? This unblemished moon is mortal nature. But you're not mortal, and what I say may matter little to you. Yet you, eternal solitary wanderer, you who are so pensive, understand this life on earth perhaps, what our suffering and sighing is, what this death is, this last paling of the face, and leaving earth behind, deserting all familiar, loving company. And certainly you comprehend the why of things and see the usefulness of morning, evening, and the silent, endless pace of time. Certainly you know for whose sweet love spring smiles, who enjoys the heat, and what winter and its ice are for. You know and understand 1,000 things that are hidden to a simple shepherd. Not just often when I watch you standing still above the empty plain whose last horizon closes with the sky, or moving with me step by step as I wander with my flock, or when I see the stars burn up in heaven, I ask myself, why all these lights? What does the endless air do, and that deep, eternal blue? What is the meaning of this enormous solitude? And what am I? I ask myself about this boundless, wondrous space and its numberless inhabitants, and all these works, and all these on all this movement of all heavenly and earthly things, revolving without rest, only to return to where they started. Any purpose, any usefulness I cannot see, but you, immortal maiden, surely understand it all. This I know and feel, that from the eternal motions, from my fragile being, others may derive some good or gladness. Life for me is wrong. O resting flock of mine, you blessed beings, who don't, I think, know your own misery, how I envy you, not just because you travel as if nearly trouble-free, and soon forget each need, each pain, each deathly fear, but more because you're never bored. When you lie down in the shade, on the grass, you're calm, content, and so you spend the great part of the year and feel no boredom. I sit on the grass too in the shade, but an anxiousness invades my mind as if a thorn were pricking me, so that sitting there I'm even further from finding peace or resting place. Yet I want nothing, and so far I have no reason for complaint. What you enjoy or how, I can't say, but you're fortunate. I enjoy much less, O flock of mine, but it's not only this I mourn. If you could speak, I'd ask you, tell me why it is all animals are happy, resting at ease, while I, if I lie down, am plagued with tedium. Maybe if I had wings to fly above the clouds and count the stars out one by one, or like thunder graze from peak to peak, I'd be happier, my gentle flock, happier, bright moon. Or maybe my mind's straying from the truth, imagining the destinies of others. Maybe in whatever form or state, be it in stall or cradle, the day we're born is cause for mourning. Thank you. And now, and now we'll hear Professor Ficara.
Distinguished Director, dear colleagues and fellows of Italian Academy, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen, I have, first of all, to apologize for my weak English. I hope you will forgive or forget it thanks to the strength and beauty of the Canto Notturno. I am also very grateful to Jonathan Galassi, author of the wonderful recent translation of Leopardi's poems. I especially thank Jonathan for being here tonight. In 6 months, from October 1829 to April 1830, during Recanati's horrible night, Notte orribile di Recanati, Leopardi writes Canto Notturno, transferring ideas, that is a subject, which is not strictly lyrical, like typically love or nature would be, into a lyrical form. Ideas, as such, are apparently refractory to poetry, and yet, as Leo Spitzer observed, Leopardi makes ideas sing. And this was an absolute novelty at that time. So in this sense, Leopardi anticipates the modern program of poetry. Surely, one would object that every poet thinks and elaborates some theory, obviously. Poetry, from Petrarch onwards, is nothing else than a special form of thought. It is that sort of thought that cannot be thought otherwise than poetically. For instance, when the anacreontic and erotic, for example, poet Giambattista Zappi I, on the Arcadia founders, writes the sonnet Il Sogno, the dream, that Leopardi himself includes in his Chrestomazzia, his gallantry is based on a thought that turns desire. Desire itself is blind, obtuse, no? Into shrewdness. The sonnet tells of a poet, maybe Zappi himself, who is dreaming, and in his dream there is a small dog who dreams in turn. And the dog dreams of being Circe, Chloe's beautiful official lover, and makes love with her. And after, the dog's and the poet's dream finish. And the poet turns back to being simply Zappi, the poor poet without love. It's a joke. It's a small joke. But this small joke is not devoid of thought. The structure of the two dreams, of one inside the other, in elaborate mechanism by which truth and fiction intersect in expressing the nature of desire. But it is a thought that is at the service of poetry, and it is useful for poetry, like an ingredient, like a propellant. Surely, it is not that perfectly poetical thought that Spitzer talked about. In the Canti, and above all in Canto Notturno, Leopardi is a great philosopher and a perfect poet. Zibaldone. He accomplishes with what Eliot called his individual talent, and in a totally new way, what the tradition and the institution of poetry suggest to him from Petrarch onwards. First strophe. Immediately, in the first strophe of the canto, Leopardi establishes an analogy between the moon's being, maybe being in general, and the shepherd's existence. The moon's coming and coming again in its eternal celestial route, from evening to dawn, is like the shepherd going and going again to the fields, and for the established time, from dawn to evening. What does this mean? How it is possible that a weary and suffering human being might be like an impassive celestial body, and that what lives and dies could be similar to what does not strictly live and die in a human sense. Fernando Pessoa, who was a very attentive reader of Leopardi's Canti, once hypothesized that even stars at a certain point become weary of being stars and become bored on their own eternal brillar, sad brillar. This is glittering, brillar. This is a conjecture that Leopardi himself anticipates in Cantico del Gallo Silvestre, where the created world is imagined to die, exactly like human creatures, and also in Dialogo di un fisico di un metafisico, where Chirone, bored by immortality, asks Jove the permission to die and dies. Eternity, like time, will end up with weariness and boredom. That is to say, that in finishing, it will ultimately and paradoxically become similar to time. In this way, moon and shepherd are close and similar in their going, andare, from dawn to dusk, from dusk to dawn, which is actually going towards nothing. And yet, as soon he says so, Leopardi, in the same strophe, first, distinguishes and contrasts the moon and the shepherd, earthly life and celestial life. Ove tende questo vagar mio breve, il tuo corso immortale? Where is it tending, my brief wandering, your immortal journey? I quote from Galassi, from Galassi's Leopardi. While the distinguishing feature of Canto is questioning and doubting, more than asserting and stating, now questioning in itself assumes the nature of assertion. The aim of human life is something different from the aim of celestial life. The question, in other terms, implicitly claims the opposite to what we have just read before in verses 9 and 10. In the same strophe, Leopardi tells us that the moon is similar to the shepherd, and the moon is not similar to the shepherd. What does this mean? Above all, what looks like a contradiction is in fact the core of Leopardi's thought in Canto Notturno. The similarity and difference of the moon and the shepherd are the condition and a profound understanding between them. The extraordinary, loving intimacy that connects them in the original shepherd questioning, che fai, includes similarity and difference, at the same time exactly like in a loving relationship. We thus immediately know that we are in the midst of an oblique love scene, as if Leopardi were saying, I love what is eternal. I am embracing eternal time tightly in my arms. Moreover, the moon itself is called Virgin, Giovinetta Immortale, immortal maiden, candida, bright. It is as if the moon were a sort of beloved woman, whose unusual love that admits sudden and apparent inconsistent but plausible questions were of an intimate nature in unfinished and secret discourse. Che fai? However, the question is also, what good? A che vale? In the same intimacy of the relation between the moon and the shepherd, an absolute difference is revealed. A difference concerning not only their distinct ends and aims, but also the daily riandare, coming and coming, of the moon and the vagare, wandering of the shepherd. After the suffering and lovesick man's questioning, the man's questioning is, what is my life for? Why am I here? Where am I going? The philosopher's questioning appears. And it is a questioning that ventures to push his curiositas on as far as attempting to grasp the nature of being itself. And then the question is, what's your being for? Why are you here? Why are you that which you are? Some critics, also making reference to Petrarch's exemplum of the famous Canzone alla Vergine, have spoken of prayer in terms of supplication or in the Eucharistic or doxological form, an assembly of feelings and appeals we use to address God in silence or in solitude. However, despite Leopardi's veneration for Petrarch and the structural borrowing from him, nothing could be further from the Canto Notturno than the idea of supplication, or thanksgiving, or praise, in a word, of prayer. Because prayer, as such, don't require any investigation about why, about where, ove tende il tuo corso immortale. That is the fundamental question about being in philosophical sense. Thus, if the shepherd's question stopped at the first term of Etende questo vagare, we could actually and officially talk of prayer according to the tradition. For example, according to Augustine. I invoke you in Soliloquia 113. I invoke you, God. Your domain is all the world that our knowledge cannot grasp. But here, in the second term, ove, the question goes forward and penetrates a more unknown world, or even an absolutely unknown world compared to that of Augustine, of which, after all, we can say it is the kingdom of God. Hence, at an immeasurable distance from Augustine, Leopardi immediately realizes his dream to be great modern philosopher in perfect versification. Second strophe. The second strophe, Vecchierel bianco infermo, and the third strophes declare a general principle fixed a few months before the writing of the canto in the famous horrible night of Recanati. In Italy it's che sperare quando il male è ordinario? Dico in un ordine ove il male è essenziale. What can we hope when the evil is ordinary? I mean, in an order whose essence is evil. And it is the principle of the fundamental nihilism well known to Leopardi's readers. On one hand, an old man who we'll also find in a note of Zibaldone, walks on very high mountains and up-step trails with snow, frost, rain, wind, and runs and suppose incessantly towards a precipice, namely towards nothingness. On the other hand, a child, a little child, is born and must immediately receive comfort by his parents for being born. Leopardi's question about this child, perché reggere in vita chi poi di quella consolar convenga? Why educate someone we will console for living later? This is a rhetorical question, which should find an answer in Aeschylus or in the Coelet, and eventually also in Tristano, in Operette Morali. Better, the answer is better not to be born, be nothing. If the old man falls into the death pit, horrido immenso, horrid, great, and the child goes forward into life in a crescendo of unhappiness, life in itself that remains painfully wasting away to nothing is, in general, an absurdity. Moreover, the comparison of the old man is taken from Petrarch's sonnets 16 and 50, where, respectively, Vecchierel, a little old man, and Vecchiarella Pellegrina, a woman, an old woman, hurry, the former to a pilgrimage to Rome, the other to alcun breve riposo, that is, to her little dinner and bed. But Leopardi removes from his character the sense of movement and such, or the sheer joy of movement. His character hurries and yearns for nothing and falls into nothing. It is as if Leopardi, facing the tradition, and his Petrarch translated the andare verso la meta, going towards a goal, into going towards nothing of modern times. And it is as if nothing were precisely the new form of Christ's face in the case of Petrarch Vecchierello. Leopardi's reference to Petrarch is in any case very significant. Leopardi inherits from Petrarch this type of an old man who runs like the day runs into the evening, or like itself, runs to the end of life. But in his version of the type, Petrarch type, something breaks. Petrarch and the Christian tradition constitute a world that is close, but at the same time quite elusive and unrecoverable. And in the Vecchierello, the old man of Canto Notturno, Leopardi expresses not faith, but nostalgia of faith, of salvation, especially the religious promise of salvation. Religions, you know, as we read in Zibaldone, while deceiving us about our salvation, somehow save us here and now, hic et nunc, saving us from despair of our own mortality. The Christian religion, above all others, is, says Leopardi, estrema e dolce tra le illusioni, the extreme and sweetest among illusions. And if on one hand it deceives us by transferring the good of happiness from this world to the other, on the other hand it consoles and cures the evil of our lives. But the deep religious significance of Canzoniere in its entirely cannot be recovered or found in Leopardi. The cognition of nothingness, evident in these two strophes, second and third, cannot result otherwise than in sharp images and sharp judgments without appeal. And it is ultimately reflected in the indifference of the intatta luna, vergine, immortale, distant and foreign. The tone of these strophes has nothing of the caressing inflection of the first strophe, nor has its metaphysical hazard, its anxiety, or even conceptual uncertainty. The moon, remember, was far and near in that strophe, or even conceptual, or far and near. Its very silence concealed a trace of sense. The tone of these two strophes is instead completely assertive and gnomic, and has something of the style that Todorov would call evaluational, as opposed to emotional style. But in interpreting this point, Jacobson, more than Todorov, would help us, because according to that tradition, there are no speeches, they are not emotional in a sense. And a dash of emotionality is to be found, we have to admit, even in the portrait of the old man Leopardian, in the second strophe. And this is the sweet but compelling sound of the Italian tradition, the nostalgia of Petrarch's model, elusive and immensely loved. However, the fourth strophe, with its but, with its initial adversative, pur tu solinga, the translation of Jonathan, yet you, eternal solitary wanderer, you who are so pensive, This but, this yet you, restores the entire intimate relationship between the shepherd and the moon, and finds again the musical note, the sweet vibration of anxiety of the first strophe. The moon is a giovinetta, immortale, intende, understand, sa, knows, while the shepherds non sa, don't know, and again ask intimate and dizzying questions, as that very first che fai, what are you doing, of the first verse. It is no coincidence, however, that Leopardi here and throughout the canto strictly connects emotion and knowledge according to a theory of ideas developed when he was very young, in September 21. The theory is obviously inspired by the 19th century philosophy, according to which innate ideas do not properly exist, or rather are un inganno universale, universal deceit beginning with the history of mankind, and are at the origin of a long chain of mistakes. Ideas, as such, have no ground outside the order of things, but arise from human habits, and so they are not absolute. And about poetic language in relation to ideas, Leopardi writes, the clarity of an idea is materialized through metaphors and similes. And the power and delight of the style, especially poetical style, do require speed and the ability to elicit simultaneous ideas. From the beginning, Leopardi firmly denies that ideas pre-existed things, and he set the modern philosophy of Hume against, obviously, the old dream of Plato. All psychic content is perception, and for their part, perceptions are divided into impressions and ideas. Ideas themselves are a kind of opaque copy of the impressions, and as such, they have to do morphologically with passions. Thus, adventitious as they are, neither clear nor distinct, and almost made of matter, these modern ideas take shape in the juvenile theoretical elaboration of Leopardi and remain the philosophical background of all his poetry. That said, given the sense of that ma or pour tu, yet you, that creates the binding of emotion and knowledge of the first strophe, the fourth strophe soon takes over toward a new conceptual horizon. The first strophe, as we have seen, dwells on the vanitas, like in Coelette, where the sun is born and dies, and dying, hasten to the place where it is born again. So Leopardi's moon moves along the same celestial path forever, eternally looking at the same terrestrial path. The vanitas is an ancient theme and a constant theme in Leopardi. Vain is the circling of all celestial bodies. Vain is the time when this circling takes place. Vain is the universe. Vain is genial Leopardi, is the mystery of this universe. Vain is the mystery of this universe. The curiositas of the philosopher, che fai tu, what are you doing, does not affect the universal vanitas and its correlative apocalypse made of, Leopardian apocalypse made of desert and rubble, present in the Canti. Vain, likewise, is life with its gli anniversari, the time, il giorno volgare. Vain is the individual life that eternally passes by, blown away to be eternally replaced by other lives. Passasti, uno dei versi più belli, passasti, ad altri passar per la terra oggi è sortito, passasti. Silvia le ricordanze, Nerina le ricordanze. But the yet you in the fourth strophe also reverses this vanitas. On the one hand, if all it is in vain, it is also vain to say that all it is in vain, it seems. What does understand mean if there is nothing to be understood? On the other hand, against all evidence, here the moon understands, perhaps, translate Galassi, understand, perhaps, and mine access to meanings then transcend the very idea of vanitas. At last the moon understands our suffering, il patir nostro, our unhappiness of living, our venir meno, that is, our death, and eventually understands the space and the time. Unhappiness, then, pur tu solinga peregrina eterna, yet you, eternal solitary wanderer, you who are so pensive, understand this life on earth, perhaps what our suffering and sighing is. That human beings, rather than becoming wise or virtuous, want to be happy and cannot be happy, is the most serious scandal to Leopardi. And it is unacceptable that humans, driving naturally to happiness, find it methodically removed. Happiness is a great subject of all materialist philosophy or anti-philosophy, from the polygraph Fontenelle to the science Marquis de Châtelet, from Gassendi on to the Cher, comme il disait Descartes, according to Descartes, to the visionary Lamétrie, from the liberty in Saint-Evremont to Voltaire. For over a century, people don't write anything other than treatises, essays, letters on happiness. But what to an 18th century libertine style technically seems a viable strategy to achieve a good, to Leopardi seems an impossible dream. Like those philosophers, even Leopardi wrote his treatise on happiness. But their strategy is pulverized by the Leopardist analysis. If the man wants to be infinitely happy, and such a desire is impossible, the contradiction is in the insensitive nature, insensibile natura, and in its order that is in no way directed to the happiness of esseri sensibili, but to its own preservation. The only feasible happiness, then, is negative happiness, cioè la mancanza di infelicità, negative happiness. That is the lack of misery. Negative happiness that we feel in moments of lethargy, of stupor, when we don't know, when we do not feel in new modo la vita, our life, or when we are distracted and do not think of ourselves. Now, the surprise is that this articulated happiness system does not agree with the moon means about happiness itself, or rather about the radical patir, the suffering of the man. Without happiness, absolutely without happiness. In addition, the all, il tutto, the all known by the moon, ma tu per certo, giovinetta immortal, conosci il tutto, the all known by the moon, has nothing to do with the material and partial knowledge of the shepherd and the nihilism and relativism processed in the Zibaldone. Thus, in the same way, death is first and foremost beautiful and pitiful, and it is the only goal of unhappiness. The life sweetness of honey, mentioned with some nostalgia by the shadow of Anticlea from his immortal seat, you remember Odyssey 11, is translated by Leopardi into vita male ordinario, life ordinary evil. Life is the illness that only the medicine of death and nothingness can cure. On the other hand, in this very strophe, Leopardi tells us that death, which in itself can be called grace and good, is in fact the most heinous evil because it humiliates and destroys society and the relationship of living beings, because it breaks forever all loving company, ogni usata amante compagnia, and creates unbridgeable gaps in the world. Still, also in the Zibaldone, Leopardi especially studies the social effects of unbearable death, the point of view of those who abandoned on earth remember and cries of those who have been and will never be again. But what here in the Canto Notturno the moon means by the venir meno, the dead, and perir della terra, leaving her earth, is not what Leopardi means on the desperation on those who remain on earth alone and inconsolable. It is more a kind of general meaning of existence, il perché delle cose, the why of things, or inaccessible truth about death, something that only religions or revelation, or most recently the great romantic myths, claim to possess. As the veil of Isis in the German romantics, so Leopardi's moon contains a truth, which, however, does not require a cat or a discipline or any ritual access code to reveal itself. Leopardi moon virgin, who understands perhaps and certainly comprehends and knows 1,000 things, etc., neither reveals itself nor comes to our aid. It is an inaccessible treasure trove of meaning, which provides only one consolation and resource for the shepherd, the fact that it stands on the edge of the sky, eternally visible and queryable. So, what does the moon know exactly of time and space? The morning, time, and the deep blue, space, that for Leopardi are only names for the moon, are things and mean something. That is, they have a sense and evidence in themselves. Names for Leopardi. Time and space are accidents of things, accidenti delle cose, are metaphysical logomachies, logomachie metaphysiche, and have independent existence and reality outside our intellect. If there were no clocks, there would be no time. If there weren't things that are and dwell, there would be no space. In particular, Leopardi is far from the classic progressive concept of time, a time that will eventually wear out in eternity. Along with his empiricist, Leopardi knows that time is, on the one hand, a pure intellectual fiction, and the other hand is a useful fiction, because in time man lives, falls, rises, and becomes accustomed to even the most acute suffering. Yet, this modern and relativistic conception of time and space is pulverized in the metaphysical hypothesis of the shepherd. Tu certo comprendi, che fa l'aria infinita, che fai? Once again, Leopardi, against himself, to say against the anti-metaphysical Leopardi of the Zibaldone, questioning and searching for il perché delle cose, for the why of things, reasons about the possible existence of a sense of things. How can we conclude then about this emotional strophe of the Canto Notturno, important emotional strophe of the Canto Notturno? What are the answers to these questions that threaten all we know and believe, and what seem to us true and rational once for all? Why, about happiness, death, time, general sense of existence, Leopardi does not know or forgets what he knows? De Santis, Francesco De Santis, is my favorite critic absolutely. De Santis' genial answer in the essay on Nuovi Idilli is that the profundity of the concept is this, I quote, that ultimately the philosopher knows as much as the shepherd, and what appears ignorance or simplicity in the shepherd is actually truth. To this answer, we should not have anything to add. De Santis, notably, does not tell us that the shepherd does not know anything. Rather, that the shepherd's non-knowing is truth. On its part, as we have seen, the moon knows the all, il tutto. It knows the meaning of time, space, death, happiness. Truth, therefore, is not the sum of the acquired and progressively acquirable human knowledges, but it is literally what human beings do not know, cannot reach, cannot achieve, cannot say. It is a truth that is not at disposal, but no less true. Fifth, with the fifth and the sixth strophe, the shepherd, in his loneliness, establishes and hypothesizes a new relation between the moon and the flock. Forse, se avessi io l'ali, maybe I'd be happier, my gentle flock, happier, bright moon. In this final picture, high and low, the moon's full of being, and the non-thinking animals, almost nothing, join on the same horizon. Dimmi, dimmi, perché giacendo? Tell me, to the flock, no? Tell me why I am plagued with tedium. And before, with the same dimmi, dimmi, tell me, addressing to the moon. Dimmi, tell me, where is it tending, my brief wandering? Notably, the connection is not only affective, emotional, rather it is openly conceptual. Neither is it the case, moreover, of a character that moves from one interlocutor to another, as in a conversation. This character, the shepherd, who addresses the moon and the flock in the same way, implies that, like the silent moon, so also the unaware flock guards a deep sense and the secret that no man could ever achieve. It is a strange equivalence, because we know that, as suggested by Leopardi's Nietzsche, for example, in this book, in the famous book on the advantage and disadvantage of the history for life, that a sheep has neither science nor conscience, and as such, as unaware of and unconscious, at least, maybe it is happy. But if the sheep doesn't know anything, it doesn't not even know what is nothing. The moon, on the contrary, in Leopardi's account, knows everything. So the equivalence in itself seems to be almost implausible. The two silences, the silent moon, the calm flock, the quieto gregge, are not comparable. Leopardi, instead, on purpose, introduces beside his moon the Virgin, remember, in Petrarch Canzoniere 366, a paradoxical sheep that does not see, does not know, does not remember anything. In the original Petrarchesque and Christian picture of an authentic believer gathered in meditation in front of Our Lady, of the Regina Donna del Ciel, Leopardi's picture on the flock tells us that fate itself in modernity systematically risks incredulity. The Virgin Moon could be as empty as the head of the sheep. Everything is clear in Petrarch. The Virgin is dolce e pia, sweet and pitiful, and gives grace where il fallo abbondò, where the sin was prevalent. Is a stella polare, a pole star in the storm's life. Is divine, but also human She humanly teaches us the best way al miglior guado to the harbor. On the contrary, in Leopardi, everything is definitely less clear. Questioning the moon, the shepherd looks at the whole that the moon knows. He looks at the why of things and somehow approaches an intuitive, emotional form of knowledge. In comparing himself to the flock, on the contrary, he would like to renounce any form of knowledge in return for a bit of negative happiness, felicità negativa, that is unconsciousness and oblivion. It is a confusion. Why this confusion? And I conclude. Perhaps modernity in itself is sentimental in Leopardian sense, as far as it expresses a sort of nostalgia for the ontological truth and for that direct feeling of nature that we have lost after the first poets, ancient poets. With Leopardi, nature itself is first of all desert, in Canto Notturno as well as in the Ginestra, for example. And God himself is an absence of God, or emptiness, or silence. Not only that, and in particular, the silence of the flock appears to be the caricature of the moon's silence. And the mild sweetness of animal condition is the deforming mirror of the virgin's sublime purity. And yet, while comparing unconsciousness of the flock and conscience of the moon, and so weakening in a certain way the nature of divine in itself, Leopardi's picture on the shepherd maintains the tone of the questioning, obstinately high, firm and untiring. Che fai? What are you doing? Che fai? Perché? Why? Che vuol dire? And these questions are, well, these questions, one by one, are no less pressing than the supplications that Petrarch faithfully addresses to his unica e sola Vergine, unique virgin, human and helpful. Certainly, Leopardi's virgin moon does not bend over the shepherd like a mother over a child, and the shepherd, as a matter of fact, does not ask for her help either. The moon is abstract, candid, neither human nor sweet virgin mother, but unlike the flock, which is sweet instead, dolce, and lucky, fortunato, and unconscious, and does not know anything and is almost nothing, this abstract mother is eventually the ontological truth. This moon, who does not say anything and who, like the flock, might have nothing to say, or elsewhere, like God, knows everything and could say everything, is the truth. Leopardi, extraordinary and oblique invention at the end of the Canto Notturno is that the shepherd's love for this uncertain God goes through the love for the flock, dolce, sweet, as if the spirit could be loved only by referring to the blindness of matter. So ultimately, spiritual love cannot be achieved otherwise than by joining the philosophical habit and the metaphysical curiosity of human beings to the dream and forgetful abandon of the flock. The affective that pushes and supports from the beginning the theoretical impulse and the pure questioning, dimmi, 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 is totally deployed when the flock, blissfully resting on the grass, enters the scene. The lowness of the flock inexplicably has close connection with the highness of immortal God. The sheep's unconsciousness is closely related to the moon, wise conscience of itself and of the why. The dark abyss of the matter is exactly the source of the emotional area that reaches the moon sky. And there, over there, where there are no words, the poetical discourse closes, il sommo del discorso umano, the height of the human discourse. It's obviously a remarkable journey, after all. But how could an absolute silent God speak otherwise? Che fai tu, luna in cielo? Dimmi che fai, silenziosa luna. Sorgi la sera e vai contemplando i deserti. Indi ti posi. Ancor non sei tu paga di riandare i sempiterni calli. Ancor non prendi a schivo. Ancor sei vaga di mirar queste valli. Somiglia alla tua vita la vita del pastore. Sorge in suo il primo albore, muove la greggia oltre pel campo e vede greggi, fontane, erbe. Poi stanco si riposa in sulla sera, altro mai non ispera. Dimmi, o luna, a che vale al pastor la sua vita, la vostra vita a voi? Dimmi, ove tende questo vagar mio breve, il tuo corso immortale? Vecchierel bianco, infermo, mezzo vestito e scalzo, con gravissimo fascio in sulle spalle, per montagna e per valle, per sassi acuti, altarena e fratte, al vento, alla tempesta, e quando avvampa l'ora, e quando poi gela, corre via, corre, anela, varca torrenti e stagni, cade, risorge, più e più s'affretta, senza posa o ristoro, lacero, sanguinoso, infin che arriva dove la via e dove il tanto affaticar fu volto, abisso orrido, immenso, ov'ei precipitando il tutto oblia, vergine luna, tale è la vita mortale. Nasce l'uomo a fatica ed è rischio di morte il nascimento, prova pena e tormento per prima cosa, e in sul principio stesso la madre e il genitore il prende a consolar dell'esser nato. Poi che crescendo viene, l'uno e l'altro il sostiene, e via pur sempre con atti e con parole studiasi fargli core e consolarlo dell'umano stato. Altro ufficio più grato non si fa da parenti alla lor prole. Ma perché dare al sole? Perché reggere in vita chi poi di quella consolar convenga? Se la vita è sventura, perché da noi si dura? Intatta luna, tale è lo stato mortale. Ma tu mortal non sei, e forse del mio dir poco ti cale. Pur tu, solinga, eterna peregrina, che sì pensosa sei, tu forse intendi questo viver terreno, il patir nostro, il sospirare, che sia questo morire, questo supremo scolorar del sembiante, e perir dalla terra, e venir meno a ogni usata, amante compagnia. E tu certo comprendi il perché delle cose, e vedi il frutto del mattin, della sera, del tacito, infinito andar del tempo. Tu sai, tu certo, a qual suo dolce amore rida la primavera, a chi giovi l'ardore e che procacci il verno coi suoi ghiacci. Mille cose sai tu, mille discopri che son celate al semplice pastore. Spesso, quando io ti miro star così muta in sul deserto piano, che in suo giro lontano al ciel confina, ovver con la mia greggia seguirmi viaggiando a mano, e quando miro in cielo arder le stelle, dico fra me pensando, a che tante facelle, che fa l'aria infinita, fondo infinito sereno. Che vuol dire questa solitudine immensa? E io che sono? Così meco ragiono, e della stanza smisurata e superba, e dell'innumerabile famiglia, poi di tanto adoprar, di tanti moti, d'ogni celeste, ogni terrena cosa, girando senza posa, per tornar sempre là donde son mosse, uso alcun frutto indovinar non so, ma tu, per certo, giovinetta immortal, conosci il tutto. Questo io conosco e sento, che degli eterni giri, che dell'esser mio frale, qualche bene o contento avrà forse altri, a me la vita è male. O greggia mia che posi, o te beata, che la miseria tua credo non sai, quanta invidia ti porto. Non solo perché d'affanno quasi libera vai, che ogni stento, ogni danno, ogni estremo timor subito scordi, ma più perché giammai tedio non provi. Quando tu siedi all'ombra, sovra l'erbe, tu sei quieta e contenta, e gran parte dell'anno senza noia consumi in quello stato, e io pur seggo sovra l'erbe, all'ombra, e un fastidio mi ingombra la mente, e uno spron quasi mi punge, sì che sedendo, più che mai son lunge da trovar pace o loco, eppur nulla non bramo, e non ho fino a qui cagion di pianto. Quel che tu goda o quanto, non so già dir, ma fortunata sei. E io godo ancor poco, o greggia mia, né di ciò sol mi lagno. Se tu parlar sapessi, io chiederei, dimmi, perché, giacendo a bellagio, ozioso, si appaga ogni animale, me, s'io giaccio in riposo, il tedio assale. Forse, se avessi io l'ali da volar sulle nubi e noverar le stelle a una, o come il tuono errar di giogo in giogo, più felice sarei. Dolce mia greggia, più felice sarei, candida luna. O forse erra dal vero, mirando all'altrui sorte il mio pensiero, forse in qual forma, in quale stato che sia, dentro covile o cuna, è funesto a chi nasce il di Natale. Thank you so much. Grazie a te, grazie a te, grazie a te.
I just wanted to say it's a real pity that tonight the weather is not cooperating. No moon to see, no luna candida, eterna, peregrina. But we can imagine it, and after all, we've seen it many times. And I think tonight we've been given all it takes to look at it and to ask, che fai in ciel, what are you doing up there? And then maybe continue and pretend more, dimmi. So I just wanted to thank you, Giorgio, thank you, Jonathan, for this wonderful lecture, this wonderful reading, this very special evening.
So good. Thank you.